The titanium rod left the firing tube at exactly 14:07:11. It carried no warhead. It held no plasma core, zero internal guidance systems, and absolutely no explosive payload. Just a dense cylinder of heavy metal, accelerated by magnetic coils to a fraction of light speed, hurtling toward the largest crystalline dreadnought in the known universe. The USS Valkyrie hung above the 12-kilometer flagship like a gnat challenging a mountain. But gnats do not carry tungsten. I've reviewed the 14:07:11 logs 100 times. The weapon wasn't the ship, it was the crew. 4 years prior to that exact millisecond, the Kepler expanse offered nothing but dead protostars and suffocating silence. The rule on the bridge of the Valkyrie was absolute. Quiet meant safe. Safe meant alive. Captain Myra Cale cracked a dented titanium stylus against her palm. Tap, tap, tap. The sharp, metallic rhythm cut through the subsonic vibration of the jump drive spooling beneath the deck plates. 30 crew members exhaled in unison. She had a plan. Her left pupil, permanently dilated from a childhood plasma burn, tracked the primary sensor readout with cold, calculated precision. She did not command through intimidation. She commanded through the absolute certainty of 0 casualties in 48 months of border patrol. Chief Warrant Yara Voss hummed an old Earth sea shanty, her missing 2 fingers tracing the weapon's console. Safety was a luxury they manufactured themselves. Lieutenant Jax Oren ran sensor sweeps twice daily, not because command ordered it. Because the crushing boredom of deep space patrol made him jittery. The Valkyrie was not the largest vessel in the human fleet. She possessed minimal armor and cramped crew quarters, but she was undeniably the fastest. Myra had personally overseen the engine refits to ensure that single fact remained true. Lieutenant Jax Oren wiped a greasy smudge off his primary monitor. He chewed a thick wad of bitter stem leaf, grimacing at the stale sulfur tang spreading across his tongue. "Next resupply, I'm buying real synthesized tobacco," he muttered, adjusting his headset. "This stuff tastes like recycled engine coolant." Then his console screamed. 200 distinct gravitational anomalies ruptured the vacuum in perfect unison. The Axiom Concord had arrived. They did not drop out of lightspeed. They tore through the local dimensions, their hexagonal silicon hulls refracting the weak ambient starlight into migraine-inducing spectra. The massive fleet arranged itself into a flawless, overlapping grid. They blotted out the distant stars, casting long, terrifying shadows across the human patrol route. The communication channel forced itself open, overriding human encryption protocols instantly. A voice like grinding obsidian echoed across the Valkyrie's narrow bridge. High Arbiter Voss Thren did not offer a diplomatic greeting. He stated an absolute condition: surrender all vessels within 24 hours or face total planetary eradication. His flagship, the Unanswerable, dominated the viewscreen. It spanned 12 kilometers of ancient, impenetrable technology. They built ships to enforce absolute compliance. Myra stopped tapping the stylus. She leaned over the comm station. "We need 30 seconds." Ensign Cale Torn stared at his aunt, his hand hovering directly over the transmission kill switch. "Captain," he stammered, his fingers trembling. "Send it," Myra ordered. The transmission snapped shut. The silence on the bridge stretched tight enough to snap. Chief Warrant Yara Voss stopped humming her sea shanty. She rested her remaining fingers over the weapon's release toggles. 50 spatial distortions rippled in the dark void directly behind the Valkyrie. The human wolfpack dropped their metamaterial light-bending cloaks. Destroyers, frigates, and heavy cruisers materialized like ghosts made of tungsten and pure spite. They did not form a battle line. They scattered outward like dropped mercury hitting a steel floor. Voss Thren's tactical display registered the chaotic dispersion. For a civilization that fought in rigid honor-bound formations, the human maneuver computed as a panicked, disorganized retreat. The conquered fired their primary plasma batteries. Superheated death carved through empty space, illuminating the dark sector with blinding solar flares. The thermal wash triggered proximity alarms across the human fleet. The targets had already vanished. Jump drives spun up and discharged in staggered microbursts. Human vessels teleported across thousands of kilometers in single heartbeats. They reappeared on the flanks, beneath the massive engineering bays, and directly above the vulnerable dorsal vents of the crystalline cruisers. They struck with concentrated kinetic bursts and vanished again before the Conquered targeting sensors could even establish a preliminary lock. The Conquered sensor suites, optimized for detecting massive energy signatures and slow-moving dreadnoughts, completely failed to track the tiny, cold-running human destroyers. The human ships vented their heat sinks directly into the void, rendering them invisible to thermal scans until they fired. It was a terrifying blind spot. Crystalline commanders screamed orders into dead channels. Their rigid hierarchy demanded permission from superiors before altering tactics. By the time a junior officer requested authorization to break formation and pursue a target, the human ship had already jumped 3 sectors away. The chain of command became a suicide pact. "They fight like they are still commanding wooden sailing ships," Yara Voss murmured, her fingers dancing across the firing solutions. "We fight like we own the vacuum." "Harmonics data uploading," Oren barked. He spat the chewed stem leaf into a disposal chute. "They use static frequency barriers, generating inversion codes now. Stand by for fleet-wide distribution." 47 minutes. That was the absolute lifespan of the Conquered's impenetrable defense doctrine. Oren mapped the complex shield algorithms, found the microscopic gaps in the refresh rates, and broadcast the crack to the entire human fleet via tight-beam laser pulses. By the 48th minute, every kinetic gun in the sector doubled in lethality. The Conquered required decades of bureaucratic approval to alter a shield modulation. The pack hunters required keystrokes. A Conquered frigate shattered into 1,000,000 glowing shards, then a cruiser, then 4 more heavy escorts. The debris field expanded rapidly, creating a hazardous ring of jagged crystal and venting plasma. They isolated the stragglers. 3 human destroyers bracketed a massive Conquered dreadnought, systematically stripping its engines before jumping away to let another pack finish the kill. It resembled wolves hunting a wounded buffalo, a buffalo that took 12 entire minutes to execute a simple turning maneuver. 67 crystalline ships drifted as dead husks, venting vital methane atmosphere into the dark. "Tubes 2 through 5, Myra commanded softly. "Marine pods." No military force had ever boarded an Axiom vessel in 847 years. The concept violated their fundamental understanding of spatial warfare. You destroyed an enemy from afar. You did not touch them. You certainly did not invade their floating cities. 50 power-armored humans punched through the thick outer hull of the unanswerable. The breach alarms wailed in a dissonant, grinding frequency. The boarders did not fight like traditional soldiers. They moved like predators evolved specifically for the suffocating, dark corridors of enemy structures, because they were born on a world that actively attempted to exterminate them with ice, fire, and microscopic parasites. The boarding party tore through the internal methane atmosphere. They disabled the secondary power grids, crippled the internal sensor networks, and slaughtered the defense garrisons with terrifying, decentralized autonomy. Voss Thren watched his internal security feeds go dark one by one. Emergency, crimson lighting bathed his colossal bridge. The record shows that right before the fatal blow, the unanswerable attempted a desperate, final maneuver. Huge maneuvering thrusters ignited along the 12-kilometer spine, trying to rotate the primary weapons array toward the tiny destroyer hovering above. It was a lumbering, majestic effort. It was entirely useless against an enemy that refused to stay still. The Valkyrie hung directly above the command spire of the floating mountain. The crew held their breath. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by a sharp, metallic rhythm echoing against the bulkheads. Myra Kale held the dented titanium stylus. She cracked it against her palm, once, twice, 3 times. Her permanently dilated left pupil locked onto the targeting telemetry feeding from Oren's console. She did not blink. She did not hesitate. "Tube 1, she whispered. "Special package." The timeline synchronized to exactly 14:07:43. The magnetic coils shrieked as they discharged with catastrophic force. The heavy tungsten rod left the tube at 0.2 times the speed of light, without a payload, without a volatile plasma core, without any complex guidance systems to be jammed or intercepted. It was just pure, unadulterated mass. The Concord's defensive shields, engineered over millennia to absorb coherent photons and dissipate superheated energy weapons, registered the physical mass a fraction of a millisecond too late. The static frequency barrier parted like wet tissue paper. The kinetic rod punched through the outer hull. It sheared through 47 distinct decks of hyperdense silicon, luxurious aristocratic crew quarters, and heavily reinforced composite armor. It did not detonate. The sheer kinetic energy converted instantly into catastrophic heat upon massive physical friction. The methane atmosphere inside the command spire flash-boiled into a localized, blinding sun. High Arbiter Voss Thren possessed 14 compound eyes arranged in a flawless Fibonacci spiral. He had lived for 8 centuries under the absolute belief that physical magnitude equaled supreme authority. In his final 0.003 seconds of physical integrity, his lateral blind nervous system processed an entirely unknown sensation. His brain could not comprehend decentralized tactics. It could not process lateral movement, but it understood the terrifying math of an incoming projectile. He realized that a minor, insignificant species had broken his invincible armada simply by throwing rocks incredibly fast. The sensation had a name: fear. The bridge vaporized in a silent, expanding flash of pure thermal energy. Myra lowered her hand. She stared at the expanding cloud of pulverized crystal painting the black void outside the viewport. The primary threat had been neutralized. "Mark it," she said. They left the Arbiter's secondary escape pod perfectly intact among the wreckage. A message needed a messenger capable of feeling absolute terror. By 1642:00, the Kepler expanse fell completely silent. The quiet after a fleet massacre offered no peace. It carried the heavy sound of history rewriting its own rules. Human salvage teams picked through the floating husks of 147 warships. 12 human vessels had been lost. The ratio stood at 12.25 to 1. The outcome did not care about math. During the prisoner exchange, Fleet Admiral Sarah Voss stood before the broken Arbiter. He demanded to know how their primitive biology processed warfare. "Your world was hostile to life," the Arbiter ground out. "Hostile?" The Admiral shook her head. "Our world was actively trying to exterminate us. We beat it all, and when we looked up, we saw more hunting grounds." 2 centuries later, the Academy of First Contact archives this truth. Or rather, they archive the aftermath. The age of intimidation died in 32 seconds. The old Concord dissolved. A new federation of 63 worlds replaced it. The titanium stylus lay on the center table of the new Galactic Council. It remained dented, scratched, and entirely ordinary. The most powerful beings in the galaxy stared at the object, understanding at last that gods could be beaten with office supplies.